In 1994, Brent Mason walked into a Nashville recording studio, one of the same rooms on Music Row where legends like RCA Studio B had defined the Nashville sound a generation before, played the guitar part on a #1 country hit before lunch, collected union scale, roughly $300 for 3 hours of work, and drove home. That song went on to sell 4 million copies. He never saw another cent from it. Not a royalty, not a residual, not a follow-up check. Nothing. That wasn't an exception. That was the system. For roughly a decade, 5 men in Nashville quietly built the sound behind nearly every country hit you know by heart. The labels took the profits. The stars took the fame. These men took a handshake and a flat fee and drove back to do it again the next morning. And when the industry decided it had found cheaper options, it didn't fire them. It simply stopped calling. Their names were Brent Mason on guitar, Eddie Bayers on drums, Paul Franklin on pedal steel, John Hobbs on keyboards, and Michael Rhodes on bass. You've never heard of most of them. You've heard them thousands of times. They were, in a real sense, the inheritors of a tradition. In the 1950s and the 1960s, a rotating group of elite studio players known as the Nashville A-Team had done the same thing. Men like Floyd Kramer on piano and Harold Bradley on guitar, working the same rooms, building the same sound, under the same terms. Chet Atkins, who helped define what Nashville recording could be, came out of that era. When Mason arrived decades later, he was stepping into a lineage most people had already forgotten once. Mason arrived in Nashville from northwestern Ohio in the early 1980s with a second-hand Telecaster he had bought for $300 at a music shop just outside the city. He slept on floors. He played nightclubs. He waited. His break came when Chet Atkins heard him play and invited him onto a record, and from that point, Music Row could not get enough of him. By the height of the 90s, 8 out of every 10 songs on country radio had Brent Mason's guitar on it. Not 8 out of 10 in a good year. 8 out of 10, every year, consistently, relentlessly, and invisibly. The Academy of Country Music named him Guitarist of the Year 12 times. Music Row named him Session Guitarist of the Year 10 times. Alan Jackson once said on a television special, "Phew, that boy, he's not human." He was right. To date, Mason has played on more than 2,000 top 10 hit singles. No guitarist in recorded history has that number. Eddie Bayers sat behind the drum kit on 300 gold and platinum albums. 300. The Academy of Country Music named him Drummer of the Year 14 times, including 11 consecutive years from 1991 through 2001. If you listened to country radio at any point during the 90s and felt a groove lock into something that seemed effortless and precise and invisible all at once, that was Bayers. His name wasn't on the front of the album. It wasn't mentioned in the liner notes most people read. It was buried deep in the small print, if it appeared at all. Michael Rhodes played bass. He grew up in Louisiana, taught himself guitar at 13, and found his way to Nashville in 1977 with nothing but talent and persistence. A break at Tree Publishing, playing demos for songwriters who needed a bassist who could deliver something perfect on the first take, opened the door to session work, and from there, to everything. Rhodes played the bass line on Leanne Womack's I Hope You Dance, a song that became one of the most played pieces of music at American weddings, graduations, and funerals for 20 years running. He played on Leanne Rimes' How Do I Live. He played on Sean Colvin's Sonny Came Home. His credits stretch across records by Dolly Parton, Randy Travis, Vince Gill, George Strait, Kenny Rogers, Reba McEntire, and Carrie Underwood. Some say he played on more records than any other human being in history. For every single one of those sessions, Michael Rhodes was paid union scale, the rate set by AFM Local 257, the Nashville chapter of the American Federation of Musicians, and sent home. No royalties, no points on the master, no back end of any kind. Under the work-for-hire provisions of the U.S. Copyright Act, a session musician performing under a work-for-hire agreement owns nothing of what they record. The moment the session ends, the music belongs entirely to the label. The musician leaves with a check and no further claim to anything that music earns, no matter how many millions of copies it sells, no matter how many decades it plays on. That was the deal. They all took it because it was the only deal Nashville offered. Here's the number that puts it in perspective. In the 1990s, country music was the highest-selling genre in the United States. Garth Brooks outsold every other solo artist in American history across the decade. Shania Twain's Come On Over became the best-selling album ever released by a female solo artist. The decade generated hundreds of millions of dollars in album sales alone. The 5 men most responsible for how those albums actually sounded collected their session fees and watched it happen from a distance. Stop here for a moment, because this is the part the story usually skips. In 2002, Eddie Bayers made a phone call. He had an idea. Gather the core session players together just once for a live show. Not to back somebody else up. Not to record someone else's album. Just to play. Together. As themselves. He called Mason, Rhodes, Franklin, and Hobbs. They agreed. They performed once, intending it to be a one-off, and called themselves the Players. But something happened that night that none of them had expected. The music felt different when it was theirs. The audience understood, maybe for the first time, who had actually been in those studio rooms all those years. The Players stayed together for 11 years. 5 men who had spent a decade making everyone else famous, finally playing for themselves. In 2019, the Musicians Hall of Fame and Museum inducted the Players, a recognition that arrived quietly, the way most things in their careers had, but that stood as a documented acknowledgement of what they had contributed. It was overdue by about 30 years. John Hobbs retired in 2013, and the Players quietly dissolved. They never made the kind of money the albums they had built had generated. They did not headline arenas. There was no stadium tour. There were club venues, a handful of interviews, and an attempt to tell a story the industry had kept quiet for 30 years. In March of 2023, Michael Rhodes died at his home in Nashville. He was 69 years old. The cause was pancreatic cancer. In the statement that followed, his family directed those who wanted to honor him to donate to the Music Health Alliance, an organization that exists specifically to help musicians cover healthcare costs they cannot otherwise afford. One of the most heard musicians in the history of recorded music. A man whose bass lines played in the background of some of the most emotionally significant moments in millions of American lives. His family, after he was gone, asked people to give money to a charity that helps musicians pay their medical bills. The session system that built that decade was never designed to provide for the people who built it. It was designed to extract their talent at the lowest viable cost and move on. And it worked exactly as designed. Brent Mason is still playing. That $300 Telecaster he bought before Nashville knew his name was eventually reissued as a signature model by Fender, a guitar that now sells for thousands. The instrument that built an era is finally worth something with his name on it. It took 40 years. In 2023, the Country Music Hall of Fame honored the Players through its Nashville Cats series, a program that had previously recognized Paul Franklin in 2013 and Michael Rhodes individually in 2015. It was a quiet, belated acknowledgement that the sound everyone fell in love with didn't come from the names on the album covers. It came from 5 men who showed up every morning, played something perfect, and went home. For $300. Nashville used these men to build something that will outlast all of it. It just never told anyone their names.